Bing bong.
This is the iDanSimpson Show.
We do it because it's right.
I love the dialectic.
His testicles became swollen.
Based.
Do not come. Do not come.
I'm gonna come. Please clap.
Who's this man? This man in the hat. I'm gonna ruin this.
You're a stupid baby down, not me.
Yes. All my friends, welcome to the show. Love your face. Welcome. Before we introduce the guest for the day, I just gotta beg you. I'm begging you. For $3 a month, you can support the content on Patreon. You'll get early access to all of my chill chats for my chill talk show for leftists. It's called Leftist Chill with me, your host, iDanSimpson. But today, let's welcome to the show a new champion, Luisa Díez. Let's go. Please clap.
Please clap.
There it is.
Oh my god.
That's incredible.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate you having me on and having all the cool sound effects.
Yeah. There's honestly way too many sound effects, and I'm honestly realizing I need to mute them because otherwise people will abuse them. All right. Well, I hope my sound effects don't distract you too much. Just talk through it. That's what I suggest. Okay. So
Got it.
Really stoked to get to know you today. New champion to the stream. You do a lot of really cool stuff, and I'm very excited to get into those. Right off the bat, I know of you because we've had Jake Flores on the show, Feral Jokes,
cool.
and we've chatted a couple times. A returning champion, Jake, and you do the podcast with him. Why You Mad? Why You Mad?
Yeah.
Yeah. You also do comedy booking in New York City.
Yeah.
And you're an anthropologist at the Guggenheim, the actual Guggenheim.
Not anymore, actually.
No. Oh, shit. I didn't do my homework.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about
No,
that.
that's
I hope
okay,
that's not a
but,
bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing. I've done so much that, I guess just briefly, I did end up going to school for anthropology, cultural anthropology, right?
Yeah.
I, somewhere in my master's, realized I didn't want to be a professor and just kind of continue this closed academic conversation for the rest of my life with mostly very privileged white kids, was my experience. I went to new school, so, that was my experience. So it just turned me off of becoming a professor. Plus, the whole path of professor life seems horrible. So I was like, shit, what am I going to do? And I decided to actually go get another degree instead of finishing a PhD. And I got a degree in museum anthropology. So at that point, I went to work at the 9/11 Museum. So the first thing I actually did was I was part of the founding staff that opened the 9/11 Museum. We worked on opening the memorial, and like the names organization around the two memorial pools. And I specifically was the manager of the memorial exhibition, where my job was to collect information and verify data and stories and get pictures and things that represent all of the people that died. I was the manager of the memorial exhibition. So, while ultimately we were a propaganda tool for the state and for the war and everything, like quite literally, I didn't work for the half that was building the narrative of like what happened on 9/11 and whose fault it was and all of that.
Okay.
I worked just on the memorial part of it. So what I got to do actually that I'm proud of is that I got to reach out. I spent like 6 years on that project, and I got to reach out to all of the family members of like the security guards and the waiters at Windows on the World and the bus boys and the delivery people. When I first started working there right out of school, they had photos for everyone, basically, from the FBI, from the trials. So they were like usually the DMV photos, right? And they were grainy and shitty photos. And then the classes that are more museums do and who museums are made for, they went in and they volunteered, all their stuff. And the people who ran the museum, they went after what I call the hero stories, right? So like the firemen, that kind of stuff. But they were missing over 700 additional images for basically all of the working class people, like the people of color, the immigrants, the people who were there on an hourly wage. You know what I mean? So by the time I left, we were only missing 9 images total from the nearly 3,000 victims. And I made contact with so many families and people who I think probably wouldn't have been represented if someone like me wasn't there helping them and, assuring them that they should be part of the story, even if it's not necessarily a problem-free story, right? But anyway, after 6 horrible years of being in 9/11 stuff every day, all day, I really needed a break, as you can imagine. So I went to work at the Guggenheim, where because during building a museum, I acquired like technical abilities, like the ability to manage media and catalogs and things and all of this stuff. I went to the Guggenheim and I just worked on creating their new website. And I am not a web maker. I am a person that can talk to, I'm an anthropologist. So I am the person who connected like the curators and the artists and the teachers and the web managers and the web developers to all understand each other, and the public also who uses the website and needs access. So, I also had to represent disability rights, for example, and all kinds of access opportunities. So that was a great project because I spent a couple of years just looking at art and talking to people about art and what museums should do for you and all of that. But I ended up going to the Museum of the Moving Image after that, where I managed traveling exhibitions. And then I am now actually managing content for a media company, Paramount. Yeah, so I manage like a giant library of TV content. What I studied in school was anthropology of art and media. So I really ended up being the librarian of like all of Viacom Paramount's content.
Wow. What a journey. You have had quite a journey.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were referring to. I didn't know. I just thought you wanted to hear about the Guggenheim.
That was actually a hole. That was like a hole in my understanding of Luisa, and I'm glad you told me about that. So when I was doing my homework, came across a really nice interview. Again, I mentioned it before the break with Dale Radio. Shout out to Dale Radio. They do good work over there. I guess I never knew about it until I found their chat with you. So
they're great, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. They do a show that is mostly inviting artists to talk and people who work in the museum world or arts world. So it's pretty interesting because it's just all kinds of different walks of the art world. So check it out.
That is really cool. I love that. I learned, obviously, I learned a lot about you. You're American, grew up in Miami, Florida, and Medellin, Colombia, spent some time in other countries. If I understand correctly, I believe when your dad passed is when you came to the United States, arrived in the capital of capitalism. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think you said you didn't speak English very well, so you stayed up listening to late night TV and lots of stand-up comedy, and that's how you got super into comedy. You fell in love with it. I think you said you saw George Carlin when you were 17, and then this, that, and the other thing, and you're now a comedy booker in New York City. You would be, well, I mean, we had Jake on, and I've talked to a couple other folks, Anders Lee, who does comedy as well, but I don't know. I think you maybe are the closest thing to like an expert on comedy. I don't know if you've ever done it. Do you do like stand up yourself? I don't think I've heard about that.
Never once.
You just fucking love it.
Yeah, I never wanted to try it. I never did an open mic. Even doing the podcast is weird for me. I was just never a front of the mic person. I am I came to it as an anthropologist, frankly. It was a full accident that I ended up doing this because I guess I moved to New York for graduate school, and I was already a fan of stand-up, and then just once I finished school, all of a sudden I had free time. Like I only had one job and no homework. And so it's like, well, I guess I'm going to just go see stand-up. So I started to go a lot, and I started to go as an anthropologist in the sense of like, I started to try to like catalog in my mind the difference between the types of shows, the difference between the types of comics and comedic styles, and to create categories in my mind of, you know, how people are based on the region that they came from, how long they've been doing stand-up, the type of places that they perform or get booked at or don't get booked at, or the people that they're in a clique with. And so I was very much just this like other person in the back of the room. But usually in comedy, when you say the back of the room, it's all the comics, you know, maybe some industry. But I was like the weirdo in the back of the room that like people didn't know me. So for the first few years, comics, you know, at first they thought I was like what do you call me? Like a groupie. And I was trying to hook up and I didn't. And then, you know, they were like, shit, well, that's not it. It must be that she wants to do stand up. Right. So for
The
a few
other
years,
thing.
it followed me. Yeah. It followed me around and like, and it was just like, well, do you want to go up? Like I got offered time. I was offered booking, all this stuff. And I'd be like, no, I swear to God, I don't want to perform. And then just after a little while, comics started coming to me. So I have not ever worked for in a company or anybody that makes money off of comics, unless it was that comics recommended me for it. So like JSL and things like that. But it was comics who came up to me and would just be like, you know, I know that you see the most. Is anybody doing a joke about this premise? You know, and I'd be like, well, actually, this person has something sort of similar, but yours is different enough. And I, you know, answer their questions. And it got to be like some of them started to respect me and see me, I thought, as a friend, and I'd have made some friends. But then once I started helping comics do shows and booking shows, then the power dynamic changed. And in a way, it was like it changed before I realized. For me, like it didn't change for me as quickly. And over the years, it has changed. You know, I was just like partially going to stand up because I loved it, but also because I wanted to make friends. And I thought that the way that I would make friends was by going to places where people who liked the same things I liked were going. You know what I mean? And instead, I encountered like a tribalism that was really interesting, you know, where they needed to know like what my business here was, you know, like, what are you trying to do here? And then from the beginning, there were some who were like, okay, you know, like if you think of it as like a Jane Goodall with her apes situation, there were some who were like, okay, cool, checks out, we can hang out with you. And there were others who were like still always suspicious of what am I doing here? And then as I did different things in comedy, those relationships changed as well, where, you know, then some were like accepting of me and friendly, but then I would later realize that it was what we call networking, right? Where it was not a genuine attempt at building a connection or community or friendship or anything like that. It was work to them. So it meant that, you know, there were like a few years, I've been doing this probably like 12 years now, and there were a few years in the middle where I got offered a lot of jobs, you know, to book for TV, for festivals, for lots of shit like that, to be a manager, an agent, all kinds of weird jobs where it's like really being part of the industry of comedy, you know, not just as like a hobby alt comedy person. And I think the expectation was that I was supposed to take one of these jobs. But my awareness of that shift in the power dynamic made me not want those positions where if my ability to pay my rent rested upon comedians and how they performed, what they got booked, what didn't get booked, even if they were my friends or weren't my friends, it would be detrimental to our relationship, right? Like I could not continue to be what I try to be, which is an honest consumer and critic of comedy as an art form, and a conscientious, I would say, observer of the culture of comedy and the people in it. So I just couldn't do those jobs. You know what I mean? Like I'm not interested in living in a way where I have to live off of an artist, right? And in some ways, this has gained me respect from some comics in some industry. And for others, it's sort of like I'm the annoying communist reminding them that they're commodifying art and artists, and they are bad people for doing this. And some take it, I put comics into three categories, really, in my relationship with them. One is like Jake, where we have similar politics and views on art. We don't agree on everything, but there's mutual respect that we both have, like a respect towards comedy. And then there is a other side, fully capitalist artist side of comedy, where, just like capitalists in any other industry, they believe that their worth is in how much money they're making, and therefore how many credits they have, how much external validation and industry approval and all of these check marks they have, and not, let's say, whether they're making good art or whether they're enjoying themselves or whether they have good fans and encourage good things in people in society. None of those things matter as much to that group as, am I making money? Am I getting famous? Am I important, etc.? And in the middle is a group that I think is most like most people, which is they are aware that it is broken and that it is bad, and they try their best not to contribute to the ways in which the system and the industry of comedy is bad, but they also see it as their job, and they make what I guess one can consider necessary compromises in the making of their art in order to pay their rent, right? And my relationship to these three groups then depends on how you feel about being in those groups, right? Yeah. There are people in the middle that are like, cool, I don't always agree with everything Luisa says, but like, I'm glad someone is saying it. And then, people in Jake and I's group, we argue about the details, right? And then the other far side, the right, the capitalist side, they just have drawn the line as we are enemies, even though, just a few years ago, I was friends with some of these comedians, and we were cool. But both the political shift in this country in the last few years, and then also the fact that I became more vocal with the things that I believe about art and artists and politics and how they're all related, meant that some comics felt that there was a line that had to be drawn there where we are not on the same side of comedy.
They've drawn a line. What has that meant? Give me an example of what that's meant in real life.
Oh, I mean, in real life, it has. So it's so funny. I don't mean to drag anybody into the weeds of the comedy world, but
I'm just super curious. I got my popcorn here.
Oh my gosh. Well, some fans of comedy might be aware that there is a pretty strong strain of like alt-right leaning comedy. Okay. Politics going on, where in some cases it is as far as like, it goes as far as like being actual alt-right Nazi sympathizer type people. Like, for example, McInnes, various people that are actual figures in the alt-right world are failed comedians, like they were bad at comedy and they found an audience that responded to them and their online content when they went on these vitriolic right-wing rants. And so they became these leaders of like the Proud Boys and shit like that. Those came from comedy. That's what people don't really realize, is that originally some of these people were people like many of us, or many of the people we know, who just were like, I just want to make content and have people hear me and give me likes and stuff because I like making videos. And then they tapped into what I call the bigot spigot, which is, there's a lot of them. So numerically in capitalism, if each one of them is giving you $5, you're going to be making money, which, as we said, if you're already measuring the worth of yourself and your art in a capitalist sense, then that's going to make you feel like you're doing a good job. So there's these bad ones, but then there's a big chunk in comedy that they're just doing it because of the audience thing, because of tourist art, how to say, I feel bad because I don't think that those comics are my enemies. Like Jake might say they are his enemies, but I think that they are just like lost souls to capitalism. All right. Because, have you ever heard the term tourist art?
Tourist art? No.
No. Well, so it's like an anthropological term. It did cross over into art history and shit, but it came from anthropology because basically when colonialism was at its height and Europeans were going off to do their travels in brown and black lands, and, you know, this is where anthropology came from, was like armchair dudes being like, I got time. I'm going to go to Somalia. I'm going to write a book now. I'm the expert on Somalia, right? And in some places, you know, the beginning of this was tourism. It was like just rich Europeans who had time and ability to go travel, to go see these exquisite, exciting, exotic places. And then they would bring back art that they basically stole from the locals, right? And the locals, having not existed within capitalism, right? They were newly introduced, and this happened all over the world, right? So they were suddenly introduced to an idea of exchanging their creations for money or something of worth, right? Whereas before, they were things that they made for ideological purposes, for aesthetic purposes, to pass the time, to show love, to commemorate things. You know, this is what art was for. And they encounter these people who are like, we love it. It's great. We'll give you this other great thing for it. So slowly locals all over the world start realizing we can make versions that are just specifically manufactured for these people who want to buy authenticity. You understand me?
Yeah.
Now, the thing is that the moment that the local people decided to create the object specifically to sell to the tourists, it is no longer the authentic object that they created previously for the purposes that they created throughout their life before that, right? Or throughout their culture. So now the tourists buy this thing and they go back to Europe and they're like, well, it's authentic because I got it in fucking Sierra Leone or whatever the fuck, right? And it's then fetishized and becomes like a circular pattern of like the fake thing that the locals made for the tourists becomes now representative as the real thing of the entire peoples. But there is no examination of this transaction in culture and in time, right? That changed for them their relationship to art and their whole identity afterwards is projected by that art. But for us, it reified, I guess, the West, it reified the idea that art and therefore authenticity and therefore the artist can be bought. You understand me? And that the artist's job as a successful artist is to produce what can be sold, period. So if we bring this back to comedy, you know, it breaks my heart because I love stand-up and I love a lot of comics. And when they truly love it and they enjoy doing it, and you can tell on stage that they love doing it, that it is the process of making this art that brings them joy. It's beautiful, but it is something that you rarely see now, I would say, and you really only see it in glimpses of like the perfect show or the perfect situation for that particular comic, or they're in a good place in their life or their career. But it's rare because the rest of the time they're on this treadmill of the capitalist treadmill that we're all on, right? But, you know, I tell my friends who are artists all the time, like, my life is a little bit easier than theirs because I learn some skills and then I get a job and I get paid for my skills. And if I fuck up something in my job, like maybe I get a talking to or a write-up, but I'll fix it tomorrow. Like, I don't go home sad. My self-worth is not attached to how I do my tasks at my job. I understand that my job is a transaction that I need to engage in daily in order to survive in capitalism. And what I've done is carefully kept what is personally important to me off the table for capitalism, right? And artists have done the opposite, where they have put all of themselves on the table for capitalism. And, you know, from the moment that their parent tells them that they're wasting their time by pursuing this art, all the way to the time that a friend tells them they got this thing or this role or this paycheck and they didn't, to the next time that they can't pay their rent based on their art. And then they have to get, a regular job like the rest of us, a skill-based job, whatever, or just skill. Obviously, art requires skill. You know what I mean?
Yep. Not a fun.
Yeah. Then they feel like failures. Like they feel like their art's not good enough. Like they're not good enough. Like maybe they made all the wrong choices. And that is not all coming from the art itself that they're making. It's coming from capitalism telling you, well, you can't sell this and therefore it is not good and therefore you're not good. And to me, engaging, like, obviously, I don't know what to tell them because, like, obviously if you want to be an artist for a living and not do, let's call it a real job for shorthand.
Yeah.
And
no, I use that as a pejorative, to be honest.
Yeah, I know. Because to me, I mean, by real job, I totally mean like your labor exchange. That's it. It shouldn't be anything else because like insofar as we have not undone capitalism, the best we can do besides unionizing and trying to change conditions for labor is to withhold as much of ourselves as possible from our necessary labor exchange.
You get off on withholding, you people.
Yeah.
No, I see it. The general strike spirit, or just
exactly. Like keep, or you know what it is? It's maybe like a bad work ethic spirit. Where you're like, I'm gonna go to work, but I am not gonna do the emotional labor of smiling at you, even though I'm your waitress. Like a little petty. But you know what I'm saying about like, I guess what I'm trying to say with the comedy thing is that just like the authenticity is faked by those local artists, right? For the colonial tourists, if a comedian exists in a mindset and a framework where they're thinking, I have to make something that sells, right? Then necessarily their art becomes toothless because they are no longer seeking to be unique and to speak against or speak differently, which I think is important to the art form. They're actually seeking for the greatest common lowest denominator, like both of those. And this is how I see a lot of them have been lost to the alt-right, because online they got so much response and followers and money and people telling them that they were funny when they made jokes about pronouns and, stupid shit like that, that they were like, well, I'm getting positive reinforcement. I'm successful. I'm a good comic. And we arrive at this place where they equate capitalist success with being good at the art form. And I can't be mad at them because I don't think it's entirely escapable by all of us, but you have to work against it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
I mean, we all know the right can't meme. So are we like, I wonder what this question's, I wonder if this is going to make any sense. This just literally just came to me. Like, are we seeing like new comics, new artists hitting the scene that have only been like memeing online and they think that they have an audience, so they start doing it?
No, I don't think so.
That's for the best.
Yeah, no. Okay, I should admit a blind spot here, which is what any good anthropologist does, is to position themselves correctly before they speak, which is comedy. Stand-up comedy is like an iceberg, okay? So the tip that is above the water is less than 1%. And when I say the tip above water, like let's call that comedians who are on Netflix. Not even, because how many comedians are on Netflix that like you can't remember their name after you watched it, right? So it's not that. Let's say comedians who are straight up famous that like you can walk up to strangers and be like, you know who this is, right? That's like 10 of them. That's like maybe 15 that are still alive. That is the part of the iceberg above the water. Right below the surface of the water are the Netflix and Conan and late night and radio and headliners across the country and clubs set of comics. Those people have been doing it for at least 10 years. I would say like 15 to 25 or more, because honestly, stand-up is not something you're good at for at least 10 years. Okay.
Oh, gosh.
And yet they're under the water, right? Most people do not know who they are. And that's why people like me exist, and why it's a stupid like gatekeeper position that wouldn't exist if more comedy fans did the work of looking into comedy the way that I think music fans do. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Then you wouldn't give people like me so much power to be the only one in the city or of a handful who knows what all the talent is there. You know what I mean? But I digress. Let's get back to this iceberg.
What's the Titanic in this analogy?
Oof. I'm gonna say so far this iceberg does not have a Titanic because it hasn't destroyed anything. It's if anything, actually, you know what? It is being destroyed by climate change. It's melting. It's melting. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Because it's just capitalism is completely eviscerating the art form from the top down until it's going to sink completely. And so at the very bottom of the fat thing are the people that just started, the people who only do it periodically, right? Because, you know, I know people who put out an album once a year and they don't do stand-up the rest of the year. So they like do a one-person show kind of thing. And that's the extent of their thing. There's podcasters who will do stand-up a few times a year at their live show or whatever. So there are people who like to do it and they haven't applied this like it must be my career and do everything for me mentality to it. And then there's ones who are trying to float their way to the top to become that under the water. And obviously a lot of them want to be the super famous over the water kind of comics. But so to your question as to like what the new ones are doing, I honestly don't know because I don't care to look at that all the way at the bottom of the iceberg. No, because they're not going to be good. Like, okay, so in reality, it's like, no, I was going to make a bad analogy. Let me just say the vast majority of people who try stand-up are not going to continue doing it. It is a really hard thing, especially once you get over, I think, the first year or two of thinking that it's just like a thing about being charming on stage and things will come to me that I'll talk about, you know, like this very not real idea of what you think stand-up is. Because you know what's funny? A lot of stand-up comedians are not fans of stand-up. They didn't watch it. They are not into it. They don't watch other comics. They don't stay in the room when other comics perform. So it is this weird way of approaching an art form where you are not considerate of what you decided to enter into, and then you're faced with it later. And they have a lot of problems with that vary. But what was I saying? I forgot.
The new comedians.
Oh, yeah. So they disappear, basically. So it's hard. It is something that you just are more likely to quit than not. So I don't know. I only started paying attention to you, really. Like, I made my assessment. I spent a few years going to open mics. Oh, my God. Dan, I don't know if you've been, but that's bad.
I stay away.
Yeah, so I spent some time, that probably contributed to people thinking I wanted to be a comic, but I was there to try to understand the difference between all the shows. Yeah, and so there are different types of open mics, and they do feature different types of talent of different levels. So it was an interesting experience, and I made my assessment of what open mics are, and I don't usually go back to check in on the brand new.
Oof.
Yeah.
Luisa, I'm picking up on something right now as I'm talking to you. It's like a little bit of a siren here in the background, and that's wonderful. We're making content live here on Twitch.com. Do you stream? Have you streamed on Twitch.com before? Is this your first?
I think I did Antifada's Twitch one time.
And I think you joined us on Meet the Left, right?
With Meet the Left.
Okay.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Welcome back to Twitch. We had a raid earlier. That means someone else's channel raided ours. And thank you for that raid. Raiders, if you're still with me, thank you so much. It was The Real Jeff Holiday. They make great content. Infiltrated this like this like right-wing Christian nationalism conference. It was hilarious. Okay. But I'm picking up on something which is like, you know, you're like an expert of comedy. You don't come off to me as like super but you don't like come off to me as like super like intimidating. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, nervous about like cracking jokes over here. All I do is I sit here and I crack jokes about politics all day. Not being an expert at either. In fact, I'm bad at both. But so I don't know why anyone watches me. But like, you know, I know that you hear a lot of bad comedy from people trying to get into it. There's some, you know, you got to watch a bunch of stand up. I know. And I also know you talked about how like watching video sucks compared to being in the club, and I think that would be an interesting angle maybe to talk about. There's so much I want to talk about with you, but like I wonder if you notice that like people are less willing to, since maybe you walk into the room and they're like, oh, this is the comedy expert. They're less willing to like crack jokes because I'm sort of like desperately trying to avoid to, you know, not look not funny to you. And then maybe the other side of that coin is that people are like super willing. They're like a little bit too willing to joke with you. They're like, hey, check out this joke. See me. I'm funny, even though I don't do it. You just acknowledge me, please, right?
Yeah, I mean, it covers the whole spectrum, to be honest with you. And it was part of this thing that made me, I guess, hyper aware of how like the power dynamics and everything changed amongst a group of people that I was previously just like quietly observing, and nobody minded me. And they were, you know, like tops like, oh, she's cool. Here's a drink, you know, but suddenly, yeah, you know, and especially a few years in, what happened actually was that kind of like the comics I came up with, let's put it like that, the ones that I met when I first started coming out around in the scene, as they either moved up, quote unquote, right, and got all those accolades, etc. And as some of them quit and got married and had children and moved to the middle of the country, I stayed. And then new little waves come from different cities, right? If I ever do finish writing my book, I'm going to have a little migration map and everything that'll explain where comics come from and where they go. But these little waves of migrations from different cities would come. And a few years in, what would happen is like they came already aware of me. Because through social media, or, you know, I ran shows also in LA, and other cities. Sometimes I did a JFO in Montreal. So, and I went to a lot of comedy festivals. So then it would happen that like young comics started to move to the city, and then they would go to one of my shows or see me at a show and be like, oh my God, you were, and like they thought I was important. And I was like, what the fuck is happening right now? And they'd be like, no. So then I started to see that to some people, their interaction with me was tied to like their goals and dreams and aspirations and all this shit. And I was like, whoa, man, too much. Like, I can't do this because I'm not an extrovert like this. And I am not looking at you all as transactions. So I'm very uncomfortable that you look at me as transactions. So, you know, there is that. But there is, so those people are more like networking at me. They don't usually do like try to be funny at me. They will straight up network me and then email me or like DM me a link of their stand-up to be like, here's me doing stand-up, put me on a show. But I would say that like in more non-comic interactions with non-comics, it goes one of two ways. One is what you're saying, where it's like, I don't want to put a comedian opinion out. Like, I don't want to say I think this special is good or this comic is funny, you know, that kind of thing in front of me because they think I'm going to judge. And I am. But we'll talk about it. Or what I'll usually do is recommend something that I think they would like that is a better version of that, that's lesser known. But then the real bad thing to me was, especially when dating a lot in New York City, oh man, real average dudes have a real problem with thinking that they are super funny because their moms laughed at their jokes. People like they're the funniest in their office. You know what I mean?
All right, the interview's over. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hear me out.
What a nice chat we had. I can't believe it ended like this.
No, you were in the good category. These guys will do the thing where they'll be like, oh, you know about comedy? Okay, so either they will start kind of like grilling me, you know, like being like, well, what about, did you watch this? And do you know the title of this special and whatever? Or they will do the thing of trying to tell jokes and be super funny. And then I'm just like, oh, well, if it's funny, I'll laugh, obviously. But if it's not, I won't. So you did this to yourself. And I think that the difference between those two groups is just whether they respect me or not. You know, like if you respect me or know what the amount of time and thought I've put into stand-up, then, which is funny, I don't do it, but you know what I mean, then you might be hesitant to be dismissive around me about comedy. But if you don't respect me or you don't know, then you might be more likely to be like, let's test out what you know, right? So, anthropologically, just putting people in categories. That's all I do.
Very good. Well, this is the Luisa Respecter stream. We do nothing but respect Luisa. Yeah, I think before the break I mentioned that we've had Jake Flores joining you on Why You Mad Pod. Luisa, I'm just really enjoying the chat. I just got to say this. I have so much that I want to chat with you about, but I know you got a hard stop before the top of the hour here. Just want to let you know. Generally keep folks around for an hour, just respect their time. But and of course, just let me know if you need to dip out.
Cool.
One thing I definitely want to do. There's a couple things I wanted to touch on. One thing was one of your more recent podcasts with Jake, the Why You Mad Pod, and I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat for chat. There it is. We got all your links. You can click them all, chat, including the Patreon for Why You Mad. And yeah, so you seem to have this really great big realization. I want to talk about that. And then I also just generally want to touch on, for my audience, like the general, just like how the industry is. And I know you've been touching on it already. I just want to just maybe more explicitly touch on it for my audience, maybe especially my capital understander audience, the people who've understood the labor theory of value. Let's start there. Is the comedy scene still based off of? I mean, you already touched it. It's capitalism. It's still based off of exploitation. Based off of, if there are a few getting wealthy, and there are a few, I think, getting wealthy, it's only because of the relentless work of massive amounts of comics and everyone else in the industry. Is that an accurate or inaccurate way to put it?
Yeah, no, it's completely accurate. Probably like most industries within capitalism, it's completely artificial, right? Because what it is like even the shape of comedy itself is artificial. And what I mean is the product that it makes. Because what's funny is like most art forms produce a product that can be sold, right? Whether it's video, music, or music had the problem with downloads, but let's not go there. But most art forms produce an actual object that then can be sold through capitalist exchange, which suits capitalism just fine. They were able to do something with that. With stand-up comedy, the actual art is the live performance of. It's the performance. You know what I mean? It is never the same twice. It is not like a one-person show where it is rehearsed to purposely be the same every single time. It is a performance that is dependent on the mood of the performer, of what has happened to them that day or that month, of the room, like literally the shape of the room, whether it has high ceilings or low ceilings, whether it's too big or too small, if the acoustics are bad, if too many people are standing for too long. It is about trying to catch this like lightning in a bottle. And every performance is meant to be an attempt at that, right? And then capitalism comes along and it is like, well, what part of this are we going to sell? And it's like, okay, well, we could sell tickets to the live performance, right? But that is not a big enough industry for capitalism to do anything with, because it limits the product that can be sold to time and space. So then this leads to people thinking, well, the way that we can make this an industry is if I own and control the space where people do comedy. So that was the beginning of, we're going to make theaters and spaces for people to do that. And then these owners became definitively gatekeepers to an art form, not based on any knowledge of the art, but purely on whether they could sell tickets to this person coming to see them. So that, I would say, is like the beginning, the moment that I pointed at with the local art, with the tourist art, where their relationship to their performance changed because now it was about getting the goal of being booked at a place. So that meant you needed to have the most following or audience, which means your material and your persona and everything has to be the lowest common denominator, most approachable, least threatening thing. And after that, so that started the exchange relationship negatively.
If
and
I could
then,
just quickly
sure.
step in. So that's like the moment,
Yeah.
like the soul was like ripped from art. You know, it didn't necessarily mean there was no value to it. There was, there was no aesthetic value or whatever. But like, it's just like it's like it's just no longer good. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
It became compromised.
Yeah, and obviously that doesn't mean all art is bad. But it's just like they commoditized it, and it's no longer about whether or not people enjoy it. It's not whether about people enjoy making it or whether or not people enjoy the performance itself. It's whether or not it sells, and that's different from whether or not they enjoy it. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're completely right. And, I would say to you that maybe, in my opinion, what makes good art nowadays is the continuous attempt to break through that framework and to, I don't want to say recapture, because it is not about a returning to some pristine past, but to kind of regain the integrity of the art form, which is kind of an impossible task to put to a bunch of artists when the rest of us are also still entangled in capitalism in many similar ways. But, it is something that I wish that they would study and think about, because it would inform the way that they go about making their art and engaging with not just their peers, but with industry. And, maybe, not to say that I want to organize comedians, but maybe, like having this perspective that would allow them to advocate for themselves in a way where they wouldn't be taken advantage of by industry as much, right? But to say this thing about the shape, so back to like what object do we sell, right? Mm-hmm. So the object that we sell in stand-up, we think that it's tickets to live performances, but in reality, most people don't go see live stand-up. They go once a year, maybe 3 times in their life, something like that. But all these spaces where live comedy is happening have to exist in order to be workout rooms for all of the comedians that exist in the world. So with the performance you see on HBO, normally would take like a year to refine and prepare. And they are not doing this in front of a camera and a studio audience for a year. They're doing it in small clubs and alt rooms and the back of pool rooms and things like that, where they are working out the material in front of different audiences, in front of different, like literally in different cities and different types of spaces, so that they can refine what is the best version of this joke or the best order for this set. So all these spaces sort of, just as you were pointing out, exist first to make money for the proprietor, for the small business owner. Second, to provide all this fodder for industry to pick and choose which ones will be the exemplars that will keep you all going and that will make a bunch of money off of when they become movie stars, etc. And third, it exists for the comedians themselves to get better and have a space to do better. But then the ones that work full time at this, they also, have to tour the country. They have to work theaters, all of this stuff. So then we go back to the thing we sell. Most comedians have a merch table. That's the thing, right? So they have to sell like a shirt with one of their popular sayings, or, I don't know, one of those things. Or they physically sell their album, right? Not just in the showroom or like after the show, but also obviously, where records are sold. But one of the things that, they don't often think about, none of us often think about, is like most comics, they say, I'm working towards my hour. Most specials are either an hour or a half an hour. That time is completely arbitrary, right? Like, who decided that a complete comedic art piece has to be 30 minutes or 27 and a half minutes, so it could be a 30-minute show with commercials, or that it has to be an hour long to be a record, right? The people who decided were the people who run the shows and needed to sell drinks after selling those tickets. So I need you to do this amount of time because that's how long a normal dinner show would be. So the shape of the object then is also set by capitalism. So then they come in and their jokes are being, like the whole thing is really like their canvas and the product that they can make, which is not even the point, I think, of the art form. It's compromised from the beginning. And then what's worse is like, let me not shit on them. Like, let me do a little shitting on the fans of comedy, which is, I think you're all bad fans, guys. Because you, in more than any other art form, the fans of this art form completely rely on gatekeepers and on someone else surfacing that 1% above the water. And then they're like, well, Dane Cook sucks. Bleh. What did you do to go find not a Dane Cook? You get me? They're out there. They have been there the whole time. But instead, you all kept watching the 5 specials available to you that year, which means that those network people booked those same 5 assholes to do it again the next year, which means that all the next generation of comics is like, oh, what I got to do to get that is be like that guy. So then that regurgitates the same cycle again. And it is detrimental to the art form also because of us as consumers, because we are allowing them to feed us shit and then being like, well, at least I picked the best shit out of the green shit or the brown shit. And it's like, you didn't have to. You could have, just like with music, you didn't just accept your parents' music. If you are a person who believes that you like comedy, especially stand-up, you would do well to do the research and find your own comedians to support and live comedy to see, so that you can see that the ones that you like are so much better live than the album or the special that you really like. And honestly, that's what they need the most, is support and somebody going to see them so that they have to sell out less.
Awesome. Do you have a quick couple suggestions to make off the top of your head? Obviously, I'll throw out Jake, a friend of the stream. Yeah. I mean, anyone else off the top of your head?
It's hard for me because it just depends so much on the type of comedy that you like and
I like
that
Dane
kind of
Cook.
thing. Yeah,
I actually did. I loved Dane Cook.
I've laughed at
I
Dane
did.
Cook.
I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
It's not the same, though.
I was coming of age when he was doing the tour. It was like Orgasm, whatever. I don't remember. Anyway,
Shocker tour. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. But
It was a different time. What can we say?
Gerard Carmichael is very funny, and he's got a new thing on HBO now. There are a lot of different funny people. Unfortunately, most of the way that stand-ups end up making a living is by doing something else. So they end up writing. So most of the commercials you see, most of the TV shows you see, most of the movies, award shows, pretty much everything that is about making content involves comedians. And it's the way that they make money so that they can try to make it out 3 times a week and do a show for free so that they can get better for the paid gig on the weekend,
Makes a lot of sense, I guess. It's some commercials are funny, I guess.
Well, you know what? That's that selling out shit, right?
Yeah.
Writing for the lowest common denominator is what makes you money in capitalism. It's not being a unique voice. If you think back to all of art history, unique voices are only retroactively underlined and thought of as important, not usually in their own times. The people who are actually famous in their own times are the dime novelists and, the soap opera stars and the pop singers, because that's populist. That's what we are. Yeah.
I also like Katy Perry. She's got some pops.
I knew it. I could tell from looking at you.
Jesus. That's the strike too.
You don't like the jokes back, huh?
I can dish it, but can I handle it? Luisa, before we let you go, and we're coming up on an hour here, I just really have been loving this. I want to ask you about one more thing and allow you to maybe spell it out for me and my audience. I was listening to an episode of Why You Mad Pod with Jake Flores. And again, the link is in the chat. And you were talking about a big revelation, I think you had, if I can put it that way, when you were listening to an episode of Rev Left episode. I don't even know how to intro this, but effectively, you're not just a Marxist, you're not just a feminist, you're a radical Marxist feminist. All right, let's just start there. What does that mean? How do we get there?
Okay, well, so it's
I know this is a big thing to put in a nutshell. I'm really sorry.
No, we can do it. Let's do this. We've been working on elevator pitches all our life. Let's see. So, I guess what's funny is when I saw your tweet, I was like, shit, what revelation did I have? I couldn't think of what it was. So to be clear, the revelation was not the radical Marxist feminism.
Okay.
I'll explain that in a second, I think. We'll get to the revelation after that. Let's start with Marxist feminists.
Let's go.
Radical Marxist feminism. And to me, I shouldn't say to me because I think it is an accurate definition, but I will speak for myself as to how I conceptualize it and try to practice it, right? Which is that their true, Western logic leads us very often to this tree root logic form of thinking about things, as though there is only one cause to our problems, right? Like it can be followed down to its root and eliminated at its root, and that would take care of the thing. But in reality, our systems, our cultural and social systems are more of a rhizome that are interconnected. One cannot exist without the other, and therefore, for our purposes, one can't be taken down without taking down the others. So for me, Marxist or radical Marxist feminism just means that the natural progression of our ideology as Marxists and as feminists should be to undo the systems that oppress all of us, right? And that means that we do not stop short of undoing those systems in order to celebrate the moments in which we maybe gain a foothold in moving ahead towards our ultimate goal. We do need to fight for every one of those footholds and support each other in making it onto every one of those footholds. And maybe even celebrate the fact that we managed to hang on. But what's radical to me is never forgetting that you must continue, right? And when I say never forgetting, I just mean very much in a human sense. Life is exhausting, it's really hard to not want to seek the comforts of just stopping the fight and being like, I did enough, and wow, I achieved this thing, and I did better than the previous generation. I understand it is the pull for most of us, but being radical means reminding ourselves and each other constantly that we have to keep going. And so the revelation I think that you were talking about is through listening to this Rev Left episode, they had a person on who identifies as, what did she say? She identified as, a sex work abolitionist.
Oh, gosh.
Yes. And, and I'm listening and I'm like, okay, I'm agreeing with a lot of this shit because I am a Marxist feminist. I believe in abolishing all systems of work that oppress us, right? Then I see some of the replies to this tweet, and it was people being really mad and getting mad at Rev Left for having this guest on because she, I guess, does participate in some, I learned this later, that she participates in some anti-sex work I guess organizing, right? But obviously on the podcast,
bad takes. They've got some bad takes.
Well, so the takes are not bad. It's that the takes are being used to then put into practice negative practices. And I think that for the left, it is important for us to discuss that. You know what I mean? So my big revelation was this moment of disconnect within the left itself, where some people, I think, were reactionaries in saying, like, we can't ever be critical of sex work or the sex work industry because that is in and of itself anti-sex worker, right? And, you know, I think on Rev Left, they put it, the host, forget his name, sorry, he put it well, I think, which is, you know, if we criticize Amazon, nobody accuses you of being anti-Amazon worker, right? And that's because we understand that we can support Amazon workers in unionizing and getting benefits and everything that they need. But this is on the path to undoing Amazon and then capitalism. It is not on the path to making the workers in charge of Amazon. It is not on the path of making sure that workers like love Amazon and do commercials for them. You know what I mean? So for me, the revelation was that I do think that those of us on the left we have a responsibility to continue calling each other on this, right? Which is that there is a difference between being pro-worker and being anti-industry, okay?
Perfect.
And we don't even need to go into the reasons why or how the sex industry can be bad and is bad. We also don't need to go into the ways in which sex work can be liberating and empowering for some people. The point is, both of those things are true under capitalism. And our goal should be to consistently support workers in any industry to achieve equality, respect, safety, payment, you know, et cetera, but never losing sight that their boss is still our enemy, that their industry is still our enemy, that the industry's existence in and of itself hurts all of us, even if we're not in it, right? In the same way that Amazon hurts all of us. So I guess that's my explanation of like being radical is like, we can't just stop at, you know, an example that I like to use actually for this is gay marriage. You know, when we achieved gay marriage in the United States, it was an awesome, you know, like long overdue right, because of the very fact that if, as Marxists and as feminists, we understand that everybody should have equal rights and equal access to all of the benefits and services and rights of our society. And unfortunately, in our society, a lot of benefits and things are tied to your marital status. So it was extremely important. It still is extremely important that gender is not an important factor in marriage. However, that doesn't mean that we stop at, well, yay, now some more of us get access to this antiquated institution that does actually contribute to a lot of negative narratives and behaviors and psychological fallout that can be intergenerational trauma. We can't just accept marriage as like, yay, it's a great thing that we all want. I think if you are a Marxist and a feminist, you should also identify as radical enough to want to push beyond that once we achieve it for everyone.
Another thing you mentioned, that's all so great, and I don't mean to ignore it. I do want to acknowledge how much I really loved what you just said, and I agree with everything there. Not to do a circle jerk or whatever, just to say. But one other thing you pointed out was this idea of epistemological platforming, and maybe we can fit this in the last couple of seconds here. Sure. You brought up like an example of like Glenn Greenwald and people pointing to him and being like, hey, you can't trust what he says because he's Glenn Greenwald and he's got a, you know, problematic, et cetera, XYZ. And it leads to this phenomenon of epistemological deplatforming is what you called, which is, I don't know, it's sort of a stupid thing to do because sometimes people can be right despite you not liking them. It's just the whole stopped clock thing. You know, it's literally a logical fallacy, right? It's a genetic fallacy. And we all know, like, fallacies are like assumptions, you know, like stereotypes. One of my favorite Onion article headlines: stereotypes are a real time saver. You know what I mean? I mean, that's sort of true. It's what your brain's trying to do. It's like we're trying to, fallacies are like shortcuts of understanding. Our brain's trying to quickly make huge connections about huge things it sometimes knows very little about. And while shortcuts can sometimes be helpful, they obviously, sometimes they cut back. And that's why, like, I'm noticing this other thing, which is like, oh, well, Glenn Greenwald said it, so therefore it's not true because we've already epistemologically deplatformed him. But it's just like, hold on, other people are saying it as well. Can we talk about the problem at hand? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't think that it's something new.
Yeah.
I just think it's something that we are now labeling, right? Because the idea of reputation was always around, right? And I think many of us exist in the world with an idea of like my honor and my identity is tied to my word, and I try to say what I mean and do what I say, etc. Even if we're not always perfect, I think it's something we most of the time strive for or understand is an admirable quality. And I think it's actually rooted in the fact that the boy that cried wolf story, right? Where if you have already like built up this like negative karma, or I don't know, just feeling with the people around you, then your words are not going to be trusted, right? But at the same time, what you're saying is true, that we are now kind of leaning so heavily the other way into, possibly because we have an information overload, right? That we need to more quickly categorize yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, take this in, don't take this in. But it is a problem because it's not something when we had a slower media relationship. I think we were able to say there are valuable things to take from Nietzsche or from Ayn Rand or from, without being like, their character and everything means everything that ever came out of them is bad. Their politics means everything was bad. The point of art is not to give you perfect people and perfect products. It is to get you thinking and for you to make your own conclusions of your art. So what's interesting, you were saying like the stereotypes they do make things easy, and it's true. I hesitate to ever label anything as human nature, but one of the things that really is human nature are the way our brain works, which is to recognize patterns of organization and to put things and people and experiences and feelings into categorical boxes, right? And organize the world around us. And those categories are made not just by you, but also by society and by the media you take in and your experiences, et cetera. And what I would say to you is like, it's not bad that we do this. It is bad when we stop reassessing the categories and the things and people and ideas we put in those categories. So, anthropologically, like all I do is observe the world and put things and people and ideas into categories. But the whole point is like, you never stop. You can't ever stop and be like, okay, well, I'm done. I know what this group of people are like. I know what this politics means. I know what sex work, my opinion on sex work is. I know like everything. The point is not to finish life. The point is not to conclude upon everything. The point is to constantly experience, take in information, reassess your conclusions and your assumptions, and expand your categories of knowledge and interactions with others. Because that's what leads to self-realization and growth, and therefore positive social growth, right? That's not a parasitic version of expanding society. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
It really did, and I think that's a great place to wrap things up. And thank you so much for your time today. You've been a really, truly wonderful guest. I do want to let you know that like the door's sort of open. If you ever have a project or something you want to announce, please, please, please think of me and this space as a platform for you to use and abuse.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is just
I would love
a
to
blast.
come back whenever. Let me know.
Oh, thank you so much. So, folks, I believe if I were to I don't want to speak for you, but how about this? How can people support you and the work you do? We got your Twitter link and the Patreon link down there in chat.
Just follow me on Twitter to see some shows I might do. It's Luisa Díez Nuts. I do right now do a 1 monthly live comedy show in New York City and Brooklyn, Pizzazz with Gary Goldman. Oh, there you go. Gary Goldman is a fantastic comedian. And actually, everybody go check out his HBO special, The Great Depression. He is, I don't think he'll hear this, so I'm gonna say he's like older than us. Ooh, by a little bit. He's like mid-40s, right? And it's pretty interesting because I think he has like, in this sea of older men complaining about how they can't be funny anymore, he really finds a way to be super funny that younger people can relate with and like really enjoy.
This guy? Gary Goldman? Okay.
Gary Goldman, highly recommend. So that's the next one's on May 16th. So if you're in Brooklyn, definitely come out. And yeah, just check out our podcast, Why You Mad Pod, with comedian Jake Flores. We basically just talk about art mainly and media and the things that we watch and enjoy and don't enjoy and get mad at. And it usually does involve some theory. Yeah.
Right. Great. Love it. Okay. Luisa, thank you so much for your time. You've been a really great guest, a new champion to the stream. Thank you so much for being with us and for your time and for sharing your truly wonderful, valuable perspective. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Have a good weekend.
We'll hope to see you soon. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Everyone say goodbye. Say goodbye. Word on Patreon today.